In order to understand complex concepts, we must first define terms to describe aspects of the concept in a concise way. In other words, we need to reduce the complexity of a topic by breaking it into simpler but more precise terms. Once we understand each of these more precise terms, we can combine them to define something more complex. The goal of this video is to help you understand various terms in which you can use to describe your thought process in Age of Empires 2. Almost everything that you do in regards to playing a game of Age of Empires 2 can be referred to by using one or more of the terms we'll be going through. As I said earlier, in order to begin understanding the complexity of this game, we need to break up how you think of the game into more easily understandable components. We'll move through the thought process in a logical way with many terms building off of the previous one. The entire process that we want to understand is strategy planning, decision making, economy management, unit control, and information gathering. You might already recognize some of these terms as strategy, macro, and micro, but the exact definitions might be a bit clouded. I'm here to offer better definitions for these terms, as well as to add some new terms to more accurately describe things related to how you play the game. Let's start at the very beginning, the strategy phase. Strategy is how you approach the game. Decisions such as which civilization you pick, which opening you go for, your follow-up in Castle Age, how you expand on the map, and what your unit composition will be are all examples of strategic thinking. Pretty much everything you do is based off of your strategy, so having it well thought out can be the key to success. The first phase of strategy is planning. This is where you come up with possible options and what differentiates the more experienced players from the newbies. Planning includes understanding your civilization, the matchup, the map, and in some cases your opponent. Understanding mechanics such as how units move, knowing hotkeys, and knowing the most efficient way to do something are also included in planning. Improving your strategic planning is the goal of reviewing games and re-evaluating losses. For this reason, the best way to improve, especially for less experienced players, is not to play more games, but to review more losses. To demonstrate my point, I've come up with a hypothetical situation. A 1300 player gets behind to Castle Age versus someone who's going crossbowman. Their plan was to go scouts into knights, but they know that they will die before knights come out if they don't kill the crossbowman. The 1300 player is experienced enough to know that skirmishers in Feudal Age can still kind of fight crossbowmen if enough are made, so an archery range is added and skirmishers are produced. Minutes later, the opponent shows up and kills all of our 1300 player skirmishers and then easily wins the game. In this example, the 1300 player should go back and review the replay to see why their skirmishers were so useless and what could have been done better. Since I'm a 2K player and have probably over 10,000 games played, I've encountered this crossbowman timing countless times, so I've come up with a complex set of plans for dealing with it based on the state of the game. Mass scouts, tower defense, siege defense, additional TCs, knights, step lancers, skirmishers, your own crossbowmen, light cavalry, Malian longswordsmen, walls, and castle defense are all ways of potentially dealing with this timing. I won't go over the details of when I do each of these here, as that would take forever, but the point is that the more time and energy you put into the strategy planning phase, the more options you'll have when you get to the next phase, which is decision making. Decision making is choosing the best plan for the current situation. This is where you go through your options from the planning phase and pick one to do. While a 1300 player might only have two options to decide between when defending the early crossbowman attack, a 2K player will have many more. This further highlights the importance of the planning phase of strategy, as having more options to choose from can let you make better decisions in a wider variety of situations. Once you've selected your strategy, then the next step is to actually execute it. This is where we get into macro. Macro is often thought of as just economy management, but that's just one aspect of it. Where strategy is what you are planning, macro is following through with your plans. If you want to open with men-at-arms into archers, that's your strategy. Actually building the men-at-arms and archers is macro. Eco-management, unit control, and scouting are all examples of macro. Your build order is the most obvious example of eco-management, as it's just a sequence of instructions that you have to perform. Constantly creating villagers, sending villagers to the right place at the right time, and spending resources as soon as possible, especially wood, is at the heart of good economy management, which is an important part of macro. Your build order is essentially just the eco-management that you do at the start of the game. The next subcategory under macro is unit control. You might say that all unit control is micro, but I'd argue that it's the other way around. All micro is unit control, and unit control is part of macro. The micro aspect of unit control is when you control your units with a specific purpose in mind. Maybe you want to control your archers to pick off more villagers, or maybe you want to dodge ballistics with your knights. The key distinction of micro is that it's active, meaning you must be actively controlling your units with a clear objective. The word itself, micro, comes from micromanagement, which means to control your unit's actions as much as necessary with the goal of improving their effectiveness. Just remember, micro is where you're actively controlling your units. The parent category, unit control, includes micro, which is active, but also includes passive actions as well. Sending your units toward the enemy to intercept an attack, making your units follow to a rally point, and setting up shift queues are all examples of passive unit control. The reason these actions are considered passive is because you tell your units to do something, and then you can go do something else while your units follow your orders. There's a reason why it's not considered micro if you just patrol your units into a fight and then don't touch them. This is a passive action, and while it is unit control, it isn't micro. It only becomes micro when you actively control your units mid-fight. Since this is a real-time game, microing your units has an opportunity cost. If you micro a fight, then you're doing so because controlling your units will put you in a better position than if you do something else. Bad micro is often worse than no micro, as at least if you don't micro your units, you can still do something else. With bad micro, you're basically going out of your way to make your units perform worse. Another type of active unit control is hotkey use. Though you come up with your hotkeys in the planning phase in strategy, when you actually use them, it's part of unit control in macro. In this case, the unit in unit control is referring to any item in the game. Interacting with the UI through hotkey use or not is therefore part of unit control. Some examples of using hotkeys are building villagers by using select all town centers and then pressing the create villager hotkey with or without holding shift, holding control when issuing an attack command to get your units to all attack the same unit, and creating multiple of the same building by holding shift when placing them. The next term I'll talk about in this video is information gathering. Just like the term suggests, this includes doing anything that gives you information that you didn't have at the start of the game. Scouting, checking unit upgrades, and looking at the minimap are all ways to gather information. Gathering information is necessary for adapting your strategy based on the situation. Many decisions that you make in this game are only as good as the information that you have available. You could just tower rush every game and have maybe a 50% chance of it being a good map for it, but if you pay attention to the map before you're completely committed to the opening, you might be able to choose a better opening if Trush is just not viable on the map that generated. Information gathering is only useful if you actually use the information to inform your strategy. When you scout where your opponent's wood lines are, you need to make a mental note of where you can potentially attack later. When you click an opponent's archer and it doesn't have fletching, you need to understand the implications of this. Gathering information and then processing it into something useful is very important when it comes to adapting your strategy. When you gain useful information, you can go back to the decision-making phase and see if it makes sense to update your plans. At some point, you're already too committed to what you're doing to change it, but a lot of the time, you can come up with a better strategy if you gain the information early enough. For example, if your opponent is tower rushing, if you scout it when he's sending villagers forward, you can have time to go to stone so that you can counter with 2 towers to crush the rush. If you only see the trush after the first tower is up, your options are much more limited. If the first tower goes up on your berries and you've already made a stable for scouts, you'll be really far behind if you don't have the food income anymore to produce scouts while also keeping your town center running. This shows the power of information gathering as soon as possible. There's even one aspect of unit control that is heavily influenced by the information that you have available, and that's tactics. Tactics are the little stratagems that you use when figuring out how you want to fight to play out. It often involves unit positioning, like going for a flank, but it also includes things like pushing crossbowmen into a choke point and then bringing something with area of effect damage to clean them up. Knowing the opponent's unit composition, army strength in relation to your army strength, and other factors will allow you to use a good tactic to get even more value out of your units. While micro is the unit control during a fight, tactics are the unit control that you do before a fight. A tactic can be as simple as positioning your units on a hill, or as complex as going for a huge ram push with a double castle drop while microing your cav archers to kill arbalisters and villagers. The tactic is the strategy, and the micro is the execution, also known as macro. This video has probably been somewhat confusing, so I'm going to recap what we went through here. There are 2 major categories that encapsulate almost every aspect of playing the game: strategy and macro. Strategy includes things that you think about, and macro includes things that you do. Under strategy, we went through planning and decision making. Under macro, we went through eco-management, unit control, and information gathering. Planning is coming up with ideas for how you can play the game based on things like your civilization or the map. Planning can be done when you're not even playing a game, and is the most important aspect of reviewing replays. Decision-making is deciding between the plans that you've made. You initially have to make decisions purely based on the plans you've come up with before the game started, but with information gathering, you can add and remove plans based on what you learn. Once you've decided on a plan, the next step is to do the economy management to make it happen. This means setting up your economy to complete the goals indicated by your plan. At the start of the game, this is often achieved with a build order, but after the opening, you have to have a good understanding of things like eco-balance to manage your economy well. Unit control includes active and passive. Active unit control is called micro. This is where you're controlling your units to make them fight better. Passive unit control is where you get your units to do something, and then while they're doing something, you go do something else. Information gathering means gaining information that you didn't have at the start of the game through things like scouting, selecting an opponent's units to see upgrades, or even checking the tech tree to learn something that you didn't know before. Once you gain useful information, you can update your plans and then go through the decision-making process again to see if you might be better off changing your strategy. This strategy change can be related to economy management or tactics. Hopefully this video has given you tons of things to think about when it comes to how you approach the game. If you understand thought process in a logical way, then you can more efficiently get things done, which means more ELO for you. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them down below.